The other day I was having a conversation with one of my daughters, and quite honestly, she's a lot like me. She happens to be independent in a lot of her thinking. She doesn't necessarily follow the party line. All those things are good. But we had this conversation the other day, and it went along the lines of this. Because God is always changing us, that He loves us too much to keep us where we are, He moves us closer to His image of Him in us. He reforms us to what He desires in our life. And so one of the things that came up was, well, what do people do with all those prophetic words? And what happens when people get together and they there's a prophetic word that this couple is to be married, and then they get married and then they get divorced. What do you do with that, Dad? And I said, well, there's two parts to this, or perhaps more. One of them is, the word says in the book of Amos to believe the prophets and you shall prosper. So if you in fact believe in the prophetic and you believe that there's prosperity that follows the word of the prophet, then you have a responsibility to do those things to get to where you need to be. But in the New Testament, we also have another part to that every word that a prophetic voice gives is to be judged in the council of other prophetic voices. Now, in our school, one of the things we teach regularly is we try not to, and I say try because I'm a rule breaker, but we try very hard not to prophesy anything related to birth, related to death, related to marriage, and we've even added money. Anybody that knows me knows that if I feel God is saying something in those areas, I will share it. But I also recognize that the weightiness of what I say is weighed in the council of other prophetic people. So if a couple was to, for instance, believe, and by the way, it wasn't me who said it, that they are to be together because there's people who have prophesied into their life, then they make that choice. They make that choice. But they ought to make that choice in light of asking others, do they really believe it? And then they ought to ask mature voices. Quite honestly, most of our friends aren't the most mature voices in our life, or they're certainly not the least to be unemotionally involved. And so we need to look at that. And so the next step comes, what happens when they get married, and then somewhere down the road they make a decision to not be married? I need to say this because I work with a lot of young people. I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, marriage is forever. My wife and I have spent nearly 20 years of being married. We have broken the record that others would have set for us, which were, we both had been previously married prior to our own Christianity. We've had our blended family, we've had our share of disagreements or arguments. We've had those compelling times of iron sharpening iron. My vision of it was it would be like little Ginsu knives in the room, but it ended up being more like meat cleavers some days. The fact of the matter is, we have a responsibility, my wife and I, to one another. You can say that you're under grace, but grace is the power and the empowering factor to remain in that place. Now, if you're in an abusive relationship or you made a choice to marry somebody who's not a believer, you need to weigh those things out. I certainly would never counsel anybody to remain in a marriage that's abusive, but I wouldn't necessarily counsel them to get a divorce. The end result is, was the prophecy right, or was the end result right? Every time we have words like this and people get entangled, I just strongly feel that we need to press through. Now, you may watch this and you may get really angry with me, and that's okay. You wouldn't be the first. But when we have young people that we're believing to be the next generation, the legacy of our own Christianity, we have a responsibility to them. And too often and too frequently, we allow people to make decisions. Now, I'm not saying you can stop somebody from getting divorced, but you can certainly put in place all the evidence for them to be together or not to be together before they get married. And so I'm pretty sure a lot of people aren't going to watch this. But if you're married and you're thinking about bailing, I think you need to really look at the ramifications of that. Will there be grace? Will there be all those things? The blood? Absolutely. But the end result is, what is the end result? So if you've been given a prophetic word and you struggle with it, maybe it's a reason you struggle with it. So give yourself some space to think about it. If you're in a relationship and you're getting ready to be married, consider the largeness of the decision you're making. Because it is in fact a large decision. And so I just ask you to consider what I'm saying. This is by no means a judgment on those that have divorced or been left behind. I minister to many of them. Many of them are my spiritual children. But at the end of the day, either the word is the word or it's not. Thanks and God bless you.